The New York Mets and Pete Alonso were in headlines yet again as Jon Heyman did some reporting on his free agency. Did we learn anything from these reports? I want to break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, Jon Heyman had a report today in the New York Post. He was talking about Pete Alonso's free agency. The story is titled, "What's Preventing Mets and Pete Alonso from Reuniting in MLB Free Agency?" Now, here's how the story opens up, and this is the big phrase that everyone is running with, the sizable gap he describes between the Mets and Pete Alonso. Here's Heyman's story. It says, while we've said here the Mets and Pete Alonso need to figure it out, there is said to be a sizable gap in talks at the moment. That doesn't mean he's gone. The Mets have closed big gaps before, see Juan Soto below, only that no quick deal appears at hand. Now, he goes on to talk about the Mets' fallback option, which we'll discuss a little more in the next segment. He's mentioning Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Beatty at third and Mark Finkelstein at first as a fallback option. I want to spend some more time on that. He also went on Bleacher Report Live, Heyman did, and he listed 7 teams in on Pete, and I want to talk about those. But let's open here and just focus on this sizable gap. When you hear that, you think, oh man, these sides are going back and forth. The Mets are putting numbers out each day, and Boris is throwing counter offers, and they just can't possibly meet somewhere in the middle. Here's what I'd say. Let's just imagine the Mets have a 3 or 4 year deal on the table for Pete Alonso. And it might be high AAV with opt-outs that could be there, right? The Cody Bellinger contract, I think it was 3 years, 80, something like that. Pete Alonso, maybe it is $90 million, as Carlos Baerga has reported, although you can always take those reports with a grain of salt. But let's just say that offer is real. The Mets have 3 years, $90 million on the table or something like that. That's where they're looking right now for Pete. Until another team steps up beyond those 3 years and that dollar amount, they're in the driver's seat. But Pete Alonso could have entered free agency expecting a 7-year deal. Scott Boras might still be trying to get him a 7-year deal or at least a 6-year deal. That is a sizable gap. You're talking about a 3-year contract compared to a 6-year contract or a 4-year compared to a 7-year. 3 years is a sizable gap. Absolutely. But unless another team is stepping up to that degree, and there is no team presently available on the market that makes sense to do so, I wouldn't be concerned about a sizable gap, meaning that Pete Alonso is not going to come back to the Mets. Because at some point, these two sides ultimately might meet somewhere in the middle. Also, I think you can learn a lot from reading a little bit further down in this story and reading between the lines. Because one of the great things about getting these reports from Jon Heyman is he gets his information from the source, Scott Boras, and you can learn a lot, especially after a deal is finalized. So he talks about Sean Manaea's deal in this piece, and I think it's actually the most fascinating thing in this entire story, and no one's talking about it. Here's what he says. Good for the Mets and Sean Manaea to agree on to agree at $75 million over 3. He turned down the $67 million from the A's that went to his friend Luis Severino. Manaea's market was otherwise limited due to the qualifying offer / draft choice, which is valued between $5 million and $20 million, depending on the team. So that's in there, right? The idea that the best offer that Sean Manaea got was the $67 million the A's put on the table at the beginning of the offseason. Does that make sense? Well, let's think about some of the other teams that assigned starting pitchers. The Angels got out in front with Yusei Kikuchi, the 3-year, $63 million deal. Nathan Eovaldi goes back to the Rangers. Those two sides wanted to stay together. I think that was 3 years, $75 million. All right, so that might not have been a landing spot for Sean Manaea. Then you look at The Severino deal, oh, well, it was offered to Manaea first. The more and more you talk about these other contracts that were signed, the more you realize what team was there that maybe had an offer that was better than what the Mets put on the table. Probably none. So you say, okay, well, he waited it out and got $8 million more. But then there was deferred money in that deal. Remember, there was $23.25 million in deferred money. The present day value of Sean Manaea's contract has been valued at $66 million over 3 years. He gets more with the deferrals, but present day value, what it means to the New York Mets, it is the exact market value of what the A's put forth for Manaea. That was established, $67 million that went to Severino. That's basically what he got from the New York Mets. It looks more inflated, but really it's pretty much the same deal. It's just structured differently to fit into the Mets payroll better when it comes to the luxury tax. So that was a market that was established. Manaea wanted to be a Met, two sides met, and that's what ended up happening here. So with Pete Alonso, it might be a little bit more complicated. He is 30 years old. He's a homegrown star. He maybe wants to be a Met for the rest of his career. He might want the years. The years are going to come at a cost, and that cost is average annual value. So be patient on this, because if Pete Alonso signs a long-term deal, it's going to be team-friendly. If he signs a short-term deal, it will be player-friendly, but it's going to come, with those caveats of the opt-outs and all these things, where Pete Alonso might be a free agent again next year. If he posts a big season, he's going to be in that same boat, or he's going to end up playing out a 3-year deal and then hitting free agency when he is 33 or whatever it is, right? So you just have to wait this thing out. And the one thing that's frustrating for me is seeing so many Mets fans. I know it's probably just the loud minority of Mets fans, because I see all the comments on the videos on YouTube with Mets fans who are completely in the Pete Alonso camp. But I put polls out there. Do you want Pete Alonso or Alex Bregman, or the beginning of the season, Pete Alonso or Willy Adames? And those polls come back 90-10 Pete Alonso. Mets fans, I think at large, still want Pete back. But I see so many Mets fans who are like, give him $60 million and call it. He's not worth $90 million. This is ridiculous. Like, I don't understand why fans are always more on the team side than the player side. And I get it in some respect. I was thrilled that the Mets got Sean Manaea on a 3-year deal. But I also don't want to see Pete Alonso get screwed over. And it feels like some Mets fans are impatient and frustrated and getting to the point where they want to see Pete screwed over. I don't want to see that. I like to see the Mets meet with Pete Alonso somewhere in the middle. I want to see Pete play out his career in a Mets uniform, but at a good, fair price where the Mets can do other things and address their lineup in the future. So let's just say right now, 3 years, $90 million, that's what's on the table. Maybe at some point, Scott Boras says, you know what, we'll do the $30 million a year. We want the opt-outs, make it a 4-year deal. And Mets might say, you know what, we're not going to do 4 years and 120. But we will do 5 years and 120. We'll give you the opt-outs if we can kick in some deferred money and bring that average annual value down a little bit. Talk about it. They talk about the figures. All right. Bing, bang, boom. Pete Alonso returns to the Mets on a 5-year, $120 million deal. And the deferrals maybe knock that down by $10 million. And it ends up being 5 years and 110 when it comes to present day value, or maybe even better. Maybe it's 5 years and $100 million in present day value. Who knows? But that's how this thing, I think, ends, where eventually Boras and Alonso, they come down off of 7 years and they knock it down to 4 or 5 years. The Mets meet them right there. And then at that point, once you get the years in line, once you are actually both on the same page, where Boras and Alonso are no longer dreaming of the 7-8 year deal, it's never going to come. They maybe not even be, they might even have to concede not getting a 6-year deal. Once they come down on those years and get into the range where the Mets are comfortable, which I think is probably somewhere in that 3 to 5 year range, 3-year range, high AAV, 5-year range, lower AAV, but longer term, so more guaranteed money. Once you get to that point, I think these negotiations will go super quick and these sides will get a deal done. And I've been saying that this entire offseason. So now we just have to wait and see when the Boris camp for Alonso is going to come down, and he has no incentive at this moment today to do that. He can wait until Bregman lands. He can figure out how he wants to play the market. He is still holding on to the top 3 free agents in Corbin Burnes, Alex Bregman, and Pete Alonso, and he's trying to find his best way through it to get all those guys to their preferred landing spots at the best possible deal. And I think those talks are going to come to a resolution sooner than later. I don't think he necessarily wants to be holding the bag until spring training, because that didn't work out for him last time around. So I expect at some point Burnes will land, Bregman will land, and eventually Pete Alonso and the New York Mets will come to terms on something. But there's 7 teams in on him, and the Mets are thinking about Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Baty at third base. I want to talk about some of the sillier aspects of Jon Heyman's reporting today in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Because I know for me, that definitely happened. I was almost embarrassed when I saw some subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was paying for. And for so long, Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down, help me cancel them. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Brings everything together in one place. And if you look, they have over 5 million users, and Rocket Money has saved them a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is that subscription tracker. I used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore. I saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set money aside for my future, so there's no more stressing about budgeting each month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a big favor. Hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk about some of the more interesting notes that we got from Jon Heyman today. Right in that story, he said, the Mets are considering other options at first base and also third base to a degree. One fallback alternative could be moving Mark Vientos to first base and giving Brett Baty / Ronnie Mauricio / the kids a shot at third. Okay. I would be floored if that's the Mets plan. I really would. And that is sort of a nightmare scenario. Everything went wrong. You roll into the season with that. But Brett Baty has not proven enough to get the keys to third base again. Ronnie Mauricio is coming off of a full year of not playing baseball, and I would be shocked if he made the opening day roster. I know there's a lot of people that love Ronnie Mauricio because they saw his debut and the big tools he put on display. They might not have paid attention to the entire month sample size where he wasn't really that much better than Baty or Vientos in 2023, but that's neither here nor there. Ronnie Mauricio, he could be something. He also could be nothing, and he needs time to play every day in Syracuse to start the season to get his baseball legs back under him. So I can't see him being your opening day third baseman. Could you put Acuna there technically? Sure. On opening day? I don't think so. Here's what I would say. If Jon Heyman put in here, one fallback alternative could be re-signing Jose Iglesias and rolling with Iglesias and the kids. With like that would at least be somewhat conceivable to me, that the Mets would maybe find some other way to address DH. Maybe they say, we're not going to spend on Pete. I talked about some DH options yesterday. We're going to sign Anthony Santander to be our DH. And we're going to move Mark Vientos to first. And third base, we're going to re-sign Jose Iglesias and figure that position out. Then I would buy it, because now Santander is your protection for Juan Soto. This idea that their fallback alternative is just, we're good. We got Juan Soto to replace Pete, and we're going to lose Jesse Winker and Jose Iglesias, and we're just going to trust the kids. It's a World Series window. You're not going to do that. Now, Alex Bregman's still out there. That's a viable alternative, but who knows if the Mets are really that in on it. I still think that might be more smoke and mirrors than actuality. The only other third baseman on the market for the Mets to go that way is Nolan Arenado. Doesn't seem like the Mets are interested. There's been no reports really linking them to Arenado. And then there's Alec Bohm. And are the Phillies really going to trade Bohm to the Mets? Do the Mets really want Alec Bohm? I don't see it happening. So they look at the free agent market. There's nothing else at third base. First base, Anthony Rizzo, Joey Gallo, Josh Bell, all the top first basemen are gone. So you're left with the rest, and the rest aren't good enough. Lamont Wade, Yandy Diaz, potential in the trade market, but we don't know if those guys are even completely on the table. There's one outside of the box trade that I'm going to talk about in the final segment today that makes sense to me as the ultimate fallback when everything went wrong with the Pete Alonso negotiations and Alex Bregman as well to a certain extent that leads the Mets to making a trade with the Red Sox, but I'll hold that for the last segment. It's just not viable that the Mets would really have an alternative outside of Pete. That's why I still think this is going to get done. But Jon Heyman doing Scott Boris's bidding a little bit on his Bleacher Report Live, which is great for us content creators because Jon Heyman goes out there and he says a lot of things and it can create a lot of headlines and stories that we can, talk about when the winter gets slow. He threw 7 teams out there for Pete Alonso. And he says, someone said in the comments during the live stream, Pete Alonso's coming back to the Mets. And Heyman goes, I would have thought so, but a lot of teams are in the mix that are possibilities. And he rattles off teams: Mariners, Rangers, Angels, Cubs, Red Sox, Giants, Mets. 7 teams in on Pete. Man, that's a healthy market, isn't it? Come on. Let's go through them team by team. The Mariners, they don't have the cash to sign Pete Alonso. Okay, they're trying to flip Luis Castillo to be able to reinvest in their payroll with their lineup. I just don't see it. I really don't. And I can't imagine Pete Alonso would be happy going from New York, where he's played his entire career, and Tampa, where he lives, all the way up to the furthest team in the country away from where he lives. Literally. I just can't see it. Let's talk about the Rangers here. He says the Rangers are a team. They got Jake Berger, who's their first baseman. I think he actually butchered the name on that. And then he mentions they traded Nate Lowe, right? Well, why did they trade Nate Lowe? Because he has 2 years of control left, but he's due over $10 million in arbitration. Jake Berger, I believe, is still pre-arb for 1 more year. So they got significantly cheaper, and then they used that money and reinvested it in Jock Peterson to be their DH. That was their move. That's them. They're done. There's no room for Pete Alonso in that lineup anywhere. Doesn't make sense. Just look at their lineup. It's set. So they're really going to all of a sudden drop $30 million on Pete Alonso on a short-term deal or commit themselves long-term to Pete Alonso when it's the Rangers and they have their own cash constraints? No, it's not happening. He mentions the Angels. The Angels have Jorge Soler as their DH. They have Travis d'Arnaud, who's their backup catcher to Logan O'Hoppe, who's probably going to need a little bit of DH time to keep his bat fresh. And please, for the love of God, give Mike Trout some days off his feet so we can actually enjoy him for a full season. And don't play him in center field, but the Angels probably will regardless. They got a clogged DH spot. And then Jon Heyman mentions Nolan Shenuel as a guy that they might, move off of or bench. He's like, yeah, they have him at first base, but he had a 700 and whatever OPS. I can't remember the exact number, but I'll tell you what, he was a slightly above average hitter last year, Nolan Shenuel, and they aren't even 2 years removed from drafting this guy in the first round. He was their first round pick, 11th overall in 2023, and he's kept his head above water in the big leagues with 22 games of minor league experience. And his big league experience in 2023, the same year he was drafted, and then last year, he has kept his head above water as an above average hitter. Not great, but there's a ton of upside with Nolan Shenuel. Are they really going to give up on him for Pete Alonso for that team? Come on, that's just not real. Then you guys, the Cubs mentioned. Cubs would have to move Michael Busch to second base, he says, and trade Nico Hoerner. Well, they had Nico Hoerner on the block at the beginning of the offseason because their top prospect is Matt Shaw. Matt Shaw is going to be their third baseman on opening day because they moved Isaac Paredes. If the Astros liked Nico Hoerner, he would be an Astro, and they would have kept Paredes, and Matt Shaw would be their opening day second baseman. Nico Hoerner was not getting enough interest on the market, I don't think. They weren't getting the offers available, and now that they decided to move Paredes, who they just traded for, but they move him in the Kyle Tucker deal, they essentially already said Nico Hoerner is now off the table. And he's an elite defensive player. So are they going to get weaker up the middle, moving Bush off of first base, where he's a good defensive first baseman? You slide him to second, where he might be below average at that point. You're going to do that just to get Pete Alonso's bat in the lineup? Maybe. I could see it only if they really were excited about the idea of having a guy on their books who is going to be on a big money deal, can play some first base, can DH for them. I mean, does it make sense to have a first baseman on the books for 3 years with opt-outs? Oh, wait a minute. They had that in Cody Bellinger, and they had to get him off the books. If they wanted Pete Alonso that bad, why not just keep Bellinger, who's already on the books so you don't have to beat negotiations to get him the bat in there? They cleared that money and reinvested it by having Kyle Tucker on, and the hope is probably to save up enough and try to get Kyle Tucker to sign long-term. The Cubs are not going to sign Pete Alonso. I'd be shocked. Then you go to the Giants, who doesn't even provide any context. He just says the Giants as a team, right? That are in on him, but has no context listed. Well, the Giants are in on Corbin Burnes, and Corbin Burnes is based in the Bay Area. He is a California native. It is the perfect fit. Now, Mark Feinstein, who had a report that I'm going to talk about in the next segment here, he mentioned in his reporting about what's going on in the market, the Giants are getting impatient on Corbin Burnes, and they might pivot to other free agents. So, yeah, there is a world here where maybe they do pivot to Pete, but they also could pivot to Anthony Santander or Teoscar Hernandez, or I don't even know who's left in the market. Maybe it's Jack Flaherty, and they decide to sign Jack Flaherty. That could be their pivot. They're thinking about Burnes. Is their pivot going to be a first baseman? I don't know. The Giants are a team that I might maybe believe in, but the fact is Jon Heyman barely even mentions him. It's just like a casual throw-in. Oh, they might be in, but are they really? And are they in on a 5-year deal and more? Are they locking themselves into Willie Adames and Pete Alonso with Matt Chapman? That's their future. I don't know if Buster Posey has that much pull right away to get that done, but it doesn't seem like it. And honestly, it still feels like if Corbin Burnes gets what he likely wants, it's signing with the Giants, and then that's the last of their big money investments, and that would take them off the table. The last team is the Red Sox. He mentions the Red Sox, but they had to move Casas or Yoshida to accommodate Alonso, is what he says. Well, if that's the case, right? They can't move Yoshida. They've tried. Casas, are they moving Casas just to get Pete? Does that really make sense? To me, it's it is an upgrade, but financially, if you're the Red Sox, you have Casas, who's 25 years old, 4 years left of control. Are you really signing Pete to move Casas? It would make more sense that you want to move Devers off of third, so you sign Bregman, move Devers to first, and that makes sense. Bregman makes a lot more sense, and they've been linked to Bregman. They really haven't been linked to Pete Alonso. So I don't buy that as a team. Ultimately, as we get through all of those 7 teams listed, you can pretty much debunk each and every one of them, and that is why Pete Alonso is going to re-sign with the New York Mets. I'm getting to the point where I just want to flatly say it. It's just a matter of these teams, these sides, the Mets and the Boras side of this negotiation, ultimately exhausting their options to the point where they know that a marriage is the only option and finding a way to meet in the middle on years. That's what it comes down to. When Boras gets off 7 or 6 years and comes closer to the Mets at 3 years, the two sides can meet at 4 or 5, and then it's just about ironing out the details of the contract. And then a deal gets done, just like they had a staring contest with Sean Manaea for a while, and ultimately Manaea wanted to be a Met. He got the exact same market value that was offered him, the best possible deal. That's ultimately what he got from the Mets. 3 years, $66 million, with the inflated money on the deferrals, making it look like it's more than the Severino contract. I think it's going to be the same thing here, whether it's 3 years, whether it's 4 years, whether it's 5 years. It's ultimately going to come down to the best deal Pete Alonso got at any point in his free agency, something along those lines of value, and then just working out the details. So we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. But let's say Pete Alonso ends up signing with, I don't know, the Giants or the Red Sox. Is there a fallback option that makes a lot of sense? I want to talk about a potential trade with the Red Sox to close out the show. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown, or maybe it's how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. You also can look beyond the NFL to the NBA. Each given night, maybe you want to look at a star NBA player, look at their points. You want to say, oh, I'm going to think they're going to take the over there. You can bet on their points, rebounds, and assists. All that is available for you at FanDuel. And remember, again, when you visit FanDuel.com today and join, there's going to be that offer where FanDuel is going to give you $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Again, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for a chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me whenever news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk a little bit here about the Boston Red Sox, because Mark Finkelstein had a really interesting story talking about the Red Sox and how the market ultimately worked out for them so far this winter. The story is titled "Swift and Smart Pivots Led to Productive December for Red Sox." Here's how the story starts, or actually here's a couple paragraphs in. He says the Red Sox had their sights set on Max Fried earlier this offseason, but the left-hander ultimately signed an 8-year, $218 million deal with the rival Yankees, forcing Boston to pivot. The Sox did just that, sending a 4-player package led by Kyle Teal to the White Sox for Garrett Crochet, who was under club control for 2 more seasons before he reaches free agency. Boston remained in the market for another starter, with Seattle's Luis Castillo among its targets, but according to sources, the Mariners wanted Tristan Casas back in the trade, something the Red Sox were unwilling to do unless Seattle took back Masataka Yoshida, who has 3 years and $55.8 million remaining on his contract. Once it became clear that Castillo deal wasn't going to happen, the Red Sox turned back to the free agent market, inking Walker Buehler to a 1-year, $21.05 million deal that includes $2.5 million in incentives. Now, this is a really interesting report because it's clearly very accurate, very thorough, very obvious that Mark Finkelstein got some information from the Boston front office on how this all shaked out. And it tells us a couple things. For one, when we were talking about Luis Castillo trade, go back, I was mentioning how the Red Sox, if they put Tristan Casas on the table, they could have got Luis Castillo, and they could have. The problem, they wanted to attach Masataka Yoshida to it, so they wanted to shed that contract to take on the money for Castillo. And for the Mariners, they're trying to shed payroll. That's the whole point of the trade. Now, the Red Sox were probably saying, look, here's your 2 bats. 2 bats coming your way to help your lineup. You can be done. But I imagine the Mariners have their eyes on other bats, or they would have been thrilled to get the cost-controlled, cheap Tristan Casas, but they don't want to take on Yoshida's money. It's interesting, though, because this could be an avenue for the New York Mets to get a first baseman that's under team control for 4 years, who's cheap, who's very productive, and that is Tristan Casas. They just had to swallow a Yoshida contract that I talked about in yesterday's show, funny enough. I mentioned how this is a trade target the Mets could go after that they could absolutely get just by taking on the deal, and maybe the Red Sox would kick some money back the other way. Well, in this case, you get Tristan Casas, you just have to swallow the Yoshida contract. Now, the prospects going back, we'll talk about that in a minute, because in the trade that's proposed here, the Red Sox would have gotten Luis Castillo for these 2 players. The Mets don't have a Luis Castillo to offer, but let's just talk about what they would be getting. Yoshida, I mentioned him on yesterday's show. Again, 31 years old, left-handed hitter, no real position. He would be an ideal DH complement to Starling Marte this upcoming season. First right-handed pitching, Yoshida hit .310, .374 on base, .458 slug this past season. That's an .832 OPS, a .134 weighted runs created plus. That is WRC plus. Measures hitters on a league average of 100. So 134 WRC plus is 34% better than your league average hitter. So Yoshida would be a great fit. He doesn't hit lefties. Marte does. It would be an ideal DH platoon. The problem, costs a ton of money. It's about $40 million on a DH platoon. But if you're paying $800,000 for your first baseman, all of a sudden makes a little bit more sense here. So what are you really getting? You're getting Tristan Casas, who's 24 years old, is turning 25 in January. He won't hit arbitration until 2026. So 4 years of control, one more year where he's making nothing but the minimum, then 3 years of arbitration. And while Casas has hit pretty well in each of his seasons so far, for his career, he's a 250 hitter with a 357 on base and a 473 slug. So what's that, an 826 OPS? It's pretty good numbers. 42 home runs in 222 games, 109 runs driven in. I think he can do a little bit more, but even if your baseline expectation is, let's just say 25 homers and 75 runs driven in, but he's not making much of anything, it's not going to be Pete Alonso value. But actually, when you talk about value, it's not going to be Pete Alonso production, but value, it's probably going to be more valuable, or it is going to be more valuable because he's getting paid nothing. Now, you hamper it with the Yoshida contract, but Yoshida is not some bum. He can hit still. He's just overpaid. So if you blend the two together, it's actually a pretty nice deal, because as soon as Casas starts to get paid, which would be the final year of arbitration, assuming he has 3 great years with the Mets before that, when he's about to get paid real money like Pete Alonso did this past year, where he got over $20 million, Yoshida falls off your books. So you're basically stapling those two guys together. And who knows, maybe depending on the prospect return you throw in, maybe you do get the Red Sox to eat into that Yoshida deal a little bit. I don't really know. But the idea here would be you're getting Tristan Casas. He's your first baseman of the future, 4 years of control. It'd be very similar to when the Braves pivoted off of re-signing Freddie Freeman and then made a trade for Matt Olson. That's what this move would be. Although I think it might be a situation based on what's happening with Pete, where you're better off just waiting it out, because there is no reason to jump on that Yoshida contract if you don't have to. And Pete Alonso can fall back to you on your terms, and it's better to have one roster spot taken by Pete Alonso than have Casas and then a DH only in Yoshida that's on your books when he doesn't provide the power to necessitate paying $18 million a year, especially when, who knows, when this thing's said and done, depending on the years Pete Alonso gets, he might not be making that much more than Masataka Yoshida. And then when you're going to combine the two with what Casas will eventually get, once you get into year 2, year 3, the combination of Casas and Yoshida probably does get paid more than Pete Alonso, unless he takes the 3-year deal at the high average annual value. I still think Pete Alonso is the most likely fit, but let's just say Pete Alonso gets the offer from the Giants. They pivot off of Burns and say, you know what? We want Pete Alonso. We want Thump in our lineup. We want our first home run hitter, our first right-handed power hitter that's going to hit 30 bombs. I think it's just the first, it might just be the first home run hitter in general to hit 30 bombs since Barry Bonds. They want that. They look at Pete and say, he's our guy. We're going to throw 5 years at him, and that gets done. Then let's just say Alex Bregman signs with the Red Sox, and they put it out there, Casas and Yoshida, package deal available, who's in? Or maybe the Alonso thing happens first and these two sides meet, and ultimately this gets done. Then the Mets could roll out a lineup next year of Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Mark Vientos, Tristan Casas, Brandon Nimmo, the Yoshida Marte DH platoon, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Alvarez, and then either Jose Siri or Tyrone Taylor in center field. That's a really good lineup. It's not as potent, I think, as just having Pete Alonso in the mix there, but your DH situation gets better, and you get, 80 cents on the dollar on production for 10 cents on the dollar in actual money for Casas to be your first baseman. It's at least something to put in the back of your mind as, in my opinion, the most viable fallback option to Pete Alonso walking outside of Yandy Diaz coming from the Rays. I think those are the two trade targets that make sense. And when it comes to value, that would have to go back to Boston in this deal. Originally, they wanted Luis Castillo. They signed Walker Buehler to fill that spot in the rotation. Maybe they'd be interested in an optionable arm. So there's one optionable arm on the Mets 40-man roster right now, and that's Tyler McGill. Not that he's going to be the centerpiece, but he's an arm that would help their rotation depth, and then it would be prospects maybe. And so when it comes to prospects, they like pitching in Boston. They have a ton of hitting. They'd probably be enamored by getting an arm I think Sproat would be off the table, but maybe a Blade Tidwell, maybe a Jonah Tong, maybe a Nolan McLean. I think Jonah Tong is the best prospect of the three. Regardless, I think the Mets could put together a package of, an arm, like a McGill as far as an optionable arm, someone like a Jonah Tong, the really high upside pitching prospect, and that might be enough to get it done. Where taking on the Yoshida contract allows you to get Tristan Casas for a significantly cheaper prospect return than if Casas was just floated on the market by himself. So that's where I think that could end up. But ultimately, beyond any of this conjecture, I just think Pete Alonso is a New York Met. And we'll wait to see if the deal gets figured out before New Year's or if we just have to wait on this thing longer and longer into the offseason. But I am planning on doing a show for a Saturday. I'm not entirely sure yet what I will be doing. It's either going to be a look into some of the relief options. I think that's probably where I'll go, or we're going to do a little bit of a prospect outlook type situation. I just got to see what I want to talk about and also if any news drops. But expect a Saturday show as I make up for the one I missed on Christmas this week. And until then, thank you all for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, do me that favor and hit the subscribe button. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. Covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.